everyone. Welcome back to all my listeners. Happy New Year, everybody. Welcome to 2022 and bye-bye 2021. Now, I hope you guys celebrated and popped the champagne, I know I did, or some sparkling cider in the hopes of all the new good things that lie in store for us in the new year ahead. And I hope you're all having a great day so far. I know I am. Now, if it's your first time finding me, welcome and thank you for finding me here. And welcome to a brand new season. So I'm going to be starting off January with season 5, which is going to feature more of my newsworthy guests in this industry, from attorneys and compliance professionals and certified coders and CDI specialists and business owners and entrepreneurs, educators, physician advisors, other podcasters, and social media influencers. I've loved featuring all my guests from previous seasons, and I cannot wait to introduce you to so many, many more. So welcome to episode 1 of season 5. Today is Wednesday, January 5th, 2022. My name is Sonal Patel, and this is the Paint the Medical Picture podcast series. All right, guys, I've got so much to unpack today. So I'm going to be diving into my compliance tip today, getting us all back to basics with who are the UPICs. And I roll out the red carpet and introduce a very special guest, attorney Matt Lawhon, on this debut episode. And I close out today's episode with some inspirational words on clarity and focus from the great Gautama Buddha. If you've checked me out on LinkedIn, you know I'm all about compliance and protecting our physicians and valued healthcare professionals when it comes to the business of medicine. I hope this week with me brings you enough to take back to your organizations, to want to dive in deeper, to use my tips and best practices to ensure success. I hope this podcast will help you boost the quality of documentation capture and improve coding accuracy as you help your providers paint the medical picture. If you like what you're hearing, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button now so you don't miss another episode. Please write in a review and kindly drop me a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to my podcast. I'd really love your support. And as always, a friendly disclaimer. Remember, I'm bringing you the news, current healthcare industry news, my compliance tips and recommendations based on my over 10 years of experience in front office, back end, coding, and billing for multi-specialty physicians, compliance, and auditing for both E&M and surgical operative reports. These are my opinions alone and are not to be construed as legal advice. So, let's get into a very special newsworthy that features my guest today, Matt Lawhon. I'm so excited to introduce him to all of you. Now, Matt's unique background in law enforcement and legal counsel delivers the necessary experience to help healthcare clients navigate the heavily regulated environment in which they operate. For over a decade, Matt has investigated healthcare fraud and abuse, first as a senior investigator for the Medicare Benefits Integrity Contractor in Texas, now referred to as a UPIC, and then as a criminal investigator for the Texas Attorney General's Medicaid Fraud Control Unit, the MFUCU. And during the course of his career, Matt investigated hundreds of fraud and abuse cases at both the state and federal levels. He also frequently assisted in the development of cases by the Medicare Fraud Strike Force, and his successes in these investigations resulted in recognition by both HHS's OIG and the FBI. As an accomplished healthcare investigator, Matt has developed distinct insight into techniques that are utilized by agencies that have regulatory or investigative authority over healthcare providers, such as our ZPICs, our UPICs, the RACs, the MACs, the OIG, the FBI, the MFUCUs, single state agencies, as well as state medical boards. Matt also has an in-depth knowledge of the major healthcare laws governing healthcare delivery practices, like our Anti-Kickback, Stark, False Claims Act, and the Sunshine Act. As an attorney, he has used this valuable knowledge to counsel pharmacies, laboratories, chiropractors, physician groups, home health agencies, and other healthcare providers. Matt works to obtain the best possible outcomes for his clients while advising them on a spectrum of matters related to the delivery of healthcare services, including regulatory compliance, payer audits, and risk assessment. Oh my goodness, Matt, counselor, welcome. Welcome to my podcast.
Thank you for having me. That was a very tremendous introduction. I don't know that I'm necessarily worthy of that. Like I said at the conference, I prefer these introductions to be sweet and simple. Matt, pretty decent investigator, mediocre attorney, and we'll just roll with that. So it's great to be on here. I've followed your podcast, virtually through LinkedIn, and so to now finally be a guest is a tremendous honor. I was excited that you asked me, so thank you.
Oh, it's perfect. It's perfect. And like you just said, we met face to face for the first time at the NAMUS conference, which was just amazing. Your presentation was phenomenal. I know I took so much away from it. It was outstanding to learn from such a seasoned attorney. So I'm humbled that you're actually on my podcast with me. So, and I really want my audience to get to know exactly what it is you do and how you serve healthcare providers. I think it's great. I think it's absolutely wonderful. So
well, let's see if we can achieve your goals.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So you know what? Along that line, I would like to know a little bit more about your journey, right? I think folks on my audience would really like to know more about you and how it is you got to where you are today.
Yeah, so I started life as a police officer with the Dallas Police Department, and then fairly quickly transitioned into investigating healthcare fraud for the carrier. At the time, it was Trailblazer, and that quickly kind of transitioned into an entity called Tri-Centurion that no longer exists. It was the program safeguard contractor. So I did that for about 5 years, where I got really good knowledge of the internal workings of the Medicare program, how it goes about establishing policies, how it utilizes those policies in post-payment audits, and just how a claim travels through the system, right? So I got some unique insight into that aspect of it, and then was able to build a really good background on just investigating healthcare fraud. A big portion of that was learning how to utilize data to become more efficient in doing what I was doing, because we were getting 50, 60 cases assigned to each of us at a time, and it was hard to manage all that. So understanding how to use data to develop that information to quickly work up a case or dismiss a case, which happens, and do that for like I said, about 5 years. And then around 2004, the Attorney General of Texas, who's now the governor, Greg Abbott, looked at the Medicaid Fraud Control Unit, which was a small unit housed solely in Austin. It was 35 employees responsible for the entire state. And he looked at this unit and thought, well, they get a really good return on investment. So for every dollar that's spent on Mafuku, it gets vastly more back in return. So he just applied simple math and said, well, if I expand this unit to across the state of Texas, then my ROI will grow exponentially. And so he opened up offices in Dallas, Houston, Lubbock, El Paso, Corpus Christi, San Antonio, a few other places. And in doing so, I got picked up for the Dallas office in that expansion because of my previous law enforcement experience and my experience investigating healthcare fraud for the contractor. And so I did that for almost a decade. So in total, I have over closer to 15 years experience investigating healthcare fraud. And really, the transition was where I was at the carrier investigating. I would work up a case. If I felt like there was a criminal component to it, then I would have to refer it to OIG. Whereas at the Medicaid Fraud Control Unit, I was then responsible for developing and pushing for prosecution the criminal case itself. So, I was able to enhance my investigative background by being able to have access to, law enforcement resources that are used to in the development of these cases. So I was using subpoenas. I was using search warrants, right? I was, doing different things. I worked with the FBI and OIG and utilizing confidential informants. So I was able to expand my investigative knowledge by being able to incorporate these strictly law enforcement tactics into my investigation. So like I said, I did that for almost 10 years, and then decided, you know what, maybe I'll give law school a try. And got accepted into Texas A&M, which is the law schools in Fort Worth. I was able to graduate from law school, pass the bar, and without any true direction on what I wanted to do. I thought I was going to be a prosecutor. I had interned at the Collin County District Attorney's Office. Collin County is the county where I live. It houses Frisco, which is where I'm at. And I had a really good relationship with the unit that I was working with. I was with the specialized crimes, which did a lot of the white collar investigations for the county. And, like I said, I had a good relationship. The person that I was directly reporting to wrote a really nice letter for my file that said, hey, when this guy graduates, if he applies, we should hire him. But like in most things in life, transition happens, and a lot of those people left. And so, my idea of going to Collin County was somewhat dismissed because all the people I knew were gone. And so in the interim, I just tried to think, well, what should I do? Oh, I have this almost 15-year healthcare fraud experience. Maybe that's marketable in the legal world. And so I was able to find a very small firm that had a couple of attorneys that I was familiar with because they were former prosecutors at the federal level that did healthcare. So I caught on with them doing some contract work. And then after my contract was done, I was like, I still had this itch to try to be a prosecutor. They were prosecutors. I thought I was going to try to litigate. And so I left that. But again, while I'm waiting to hear back on opportunities at a county district attorney's office, I started getting calls from the people that I had done work on. And they were just like, hey, heard you left, heard everything was good. Where are you going? We might want to go with you wherever you end up. And then I had a small presence, not what I have now, on LinkedIn, and I was getting contacted on LinkedIn, and that kind of put the bug in my ear that, okay, maybe I can do this on my own and have a very small shop and serve the providers that don't necessarily have the funds to access, say, a big or medium-sized law firm, but still deserve the kind of representation that they need to navigate this heavily regulated field. So here I am in all my glory as a one-man shop, trying to help the smaller providers out there.
Well, that's incredible. I mean, your journey is like so many of ours, right? There are little hiccups, little stones in the road that you have to navigate. So thank you for sharing a lot of those honest steps that you had to take, and, roads you have to turn left or right on. So I totally appreciate that honesty. Amazing that you've gotten here. I think that's really noble. This is exactly what I do. I want to provide, some sort of coding, compliance, education for the single provider, for the smaller providers, right? Not those large hospital groups, really. So I think really that's why you and I connected about over a year ago on LinkedIn, again, for that same rationale that you also are doing really good work for providers on the smaller scale. So I think that's incredible, incredible. But I love to hear all about your past as a cop. And so it all began there, right? So you actually had the gun, you actually had to put those bad guys away, and then you transitioned and said, hey, I need to have a change in my life and I'm going to try law school. And look at that. That's incredible. So I think my audience is going to have a lot to take away there, is that anything is possible. Anybody has the capability to transition and elevate their careers, right?
I mean, if the audience is looking for any kind of takeaway in my somewhat circuitous story, it's simply that, I graduated law school at 42. And so, there might never be the perfect time to transition to something new, but you can always transition to something new and still be successful, right? So, don't be afraid to take that leap of faith and follow what you want to eventually do. So
Beautiful. That's beautiful advice, right? I love it. I love it. All right. Now, let's try and move on here to my next question. Now, you know that I'm all about working smarter for coding compliance and affecting change in this particular space of healthcare. I stay in my lane. I try and do the best I can, but I want to hear your voice, right? How is it that you do your work as a healthcare attorney now, looking at those UPIC investigations based on your previous law enforcement history? I think it's so important for my listeners to understand how these UPICs have real teeth, right? And we also share some commonality on how UPIC investigations are particularly specific for those electroacupuncture, those ear devices, all of those cases I am intrigued with. So I'd love to hear what your insights are there.
yeah, so I mean, I think one, and I try to flesh this out during my presentation at NAMAS, right? It's the UPIC is somewhat a different animal than some of the other contractors that providers may encounter, right? They might get contacted by the MAC, they might get contacted by a RAC, and those entities are really just doing some sort of medical review to see if the service was performed appropriately, documented appropriately, and if not, potentially get some money back, right? But the UPIC is different. The UPIC is supposed to have a very close working relationship with law enforcement, and that's simply because one of the metrics by which they operate is to refer cases to law enforcement. That's one of their main goals. They use data analysis to identify targets, work up those targets within the parameters established by the Internet Only Manual 100-8 Chapter 4, and make determinations based on their findings as to what to do next, with the ultimate goal of working up a quality enough case that it will be accepted by OIG or one of the any number of other law enforcement agencies that they can potentially refer to, and have that case accepted and worked, right? So when they're doing when a provider's contacted by the UPIC, they need to be looking at it from a slightly different perspective than one of these other contractors. They need to understand that the UPIC's goal is they're doing an investigation. They're not doing an audit, right? They're investigating this provider for some reason, and it's going to be more than just they're billing a service that could potentially be an overpayment. It's the UPIC has discovered something that is inconsistent enough that there's potential for criminal conduct to be involved with this case. And so to your question about the acupuncture devices, that's a situation. It's very prominent in Texas. I've seen a couple of cases pop up at other areas of the world. You seem very familiar with it too. Now I know you work in Chicago and are affiliated with an entity in Florida. So certainly you've got this national kind of aspect to your business, but it's companies out there are interested. Companies are interested in making money and selling these devices, right? And they find providers that are interested in making money, right? And so they kind of, I don't want to say prey upon, but they prey upon providers that might be looking to increase their revenue for their practice, and in doing so, they need to maybe come up with a new line of business. And these electroacupuncture devices are typically devices that get, attached to behind the ear. There's several that are FDA cleared, right? So there's a difference between FDA approved and FDA cleared. So FDA approved, it means a product went through the pre-market approval process, right? So there were clinical trials and all that stuff, and it demonstrated its efficacy, and to the point where the FDA says, okay, we're going to approve this device. The other track that they can go is the 510K clearance, where this device manufacturer can point to, one or two other what are called predicate devices, and their new device is substantially similar to these other two that are already cleared. So, if these two devices are cleared under the FDA and our device is substantially similar, we should be cleared too, right? And those products under the 510K are cleared for like pain relief associated with opioid withdrawal. The devices that I've at least looked at in conjunction with these types of cases. So it's classified as an electroacupuncture device. Its intended use is to treat, a pain and withdrawal systems, withdrawal symptoms associated with opioid withdrawal, right? But these distributors are convincing providers that no, it's a neurostimulator because it attaches to the head, and it could be used for other reasons, right? And the distributors can be very convincing with their marketing materials, and providers may not be aware of all the nuance associated with implementing a new line of business within their practice, right? They might not be aware that they need to look at the FDA information on that product and how that product is then construed within the Medicare guidelines. So, what I typically do when I've experienced it personally from a client standpoint, clients will either call me and say, I've been approached about this, can I do it? And I look at the information and tell them, no. Or it's, hey, we've been using this device, what should we do? And, I will say, well, first stop billing for it, right? And then we can figure out what to do that or next, which is, you're either going to do a voluntary refund, or you can, enter into the OIG self-disclosure protocol.
Amazing. You really expressed those FDA details. So thank you. I think you're absolutely right. From what I know about these electroacupuncture devices, there were definitely marketers that peddled around the country, really telling providers that this particular device was FDA approved and you can go ahead and bill for it. And we're going to tell you what the codes are that you can bill for it. But unfortunately, the types of codes they provided to the physicians were in fact accurate codes, but not for electroacupuncture devices. They were surgical codes, like the physician would have to have an operating room and, staff and anesthesia and go in and cut. But that never happens in these topical types of devices. So I think you really expressed really great information on the facts that providers need to do their due diligence when they're trying to implement new service lines. And I tell my providers that all the time, right? And if they happen to reach out, that's when I can come in and say, no, I don't believe this is accurate, right? Or if I don't know, if it's some new product that I'm not aware of, I will definitely turn them to a seasoned healthcare attorney and get their opinion on what to do on next steps.
Yeah, because it's really a situation. You got to look at the device,
Hmm.
and what you can do is always go look at the FDA databases and see, okay, is it cleared, right? And what were the predicate devices?
Right.
And then you can go and search LCDs and NCDs,
Hmm.
and you might not find that device because it's new, right? It might
Right.
just have received its 510(k) clearance,
Right.
but you can search for the predicate devices, and
Hmm.
Medicare does have some specific devices referenced in an article about the use of electroacupuncture. So
Hmm.
you can look to see, okay, well, this device that's being pitched isn't in an LCD or NCD, but the predicate device is referenced in one and it's saying it's not covered. Now, to your point about the actual codes that are being promulgated, right? That's where the whole data analysis aspect of identifying the providers that are using this are coming in, because the electroacupuncture device is going to be uh, billed with a place of service 11. It's going to be
Hmm.
it's going to be done in the office, right? Because it's just being
Correct.
attached.
Hmm.
Where, like you said, it's surgical codes are being pushed by these marketers, and these
Hmm.
surgical codes should either be done in an inpatient hospital or an
Hmm.
ASC.
Hmm.
So, the UPIC, even the Max or Rax, law enforcement, what they can do is simply just look at these codes
Hmm.
and look at the place of service and identify all the providers that are billing these codes in place of service 11 and go, okay, we need to scrutinize that a little bit further. Right.
Right,
So,
exactly, exactly right. Or they need to do a better job putting edits in play at the beginning so they can see right away and flag all the chiropractors or all the physical therapists or folks like that, who do not have any surgical training, right?
right.
Those providers should not be sending out claims with surgical CPT codes in the 60,000 range. That would just not even remotely
Well,
be
now
allowed.
I will say that when it comes to chiropractors, the claims, if it's being submitted under a chiropractor's UPIN, not UPIN, but the NPI,
NPI.
it should be denied up front, right? Because Medicare, Medicaid are very limited in what they cover for chiropractic. So if it's not a subluxation of the spine code,
Mhm.
then the chiropractic service is going to be denied, because Medicare, Medicaid will match that NPI, recognize that it's a taxonomy code of chiropractic, and then this is a service that falls outside what they're covered to do. With the physical therapist, it might be a little bit different. It might be harder. But again, your point is extremely valid. Why are these provider types that don't have the ability to perform surgeries, even under their board rules that are usually more expansive than the coverage policies, billing for these services? So that's a great point.
Yeah. So, you make amazing insights for my audience. This is remarkable, remarkable. Now, you also clarified that the UPIC does not audit. So, if you could just repeat that again, that the UPIC is an investigational type.
Yeah, no, and the best way to illustrate it, and again, it's something that I referenced in my presentation
Mhm.
that you were at. It's if you go to that, the statement of work, or the UPIC's responsibilities are fairly clearly defined in that IOM 100-8 Chapter 4. That's
Mhm.
the program integrity section, and it's very specific to the UPIC. If you just pull that up on a web browser, and you can go and do a find on page, right, function in your web browser. If you just look at the term, search the term investigative, investigation, right, versus audit, you will see that, terms related to investigations are utilized in that chapter, you know, exponentially more than audit. I think audit is referenced maybe 20 times or so, whereas investigation is used well over 150, right? And then if you just on top of that read through that chapter and see what they're required to do, they're required to have offices close as possible to heat strike forces. They are required to use data analytics in order to develop the best case possible to refer to law enforcement, right? There's special requirements that are supposed to be a part of any referral to law enforcement. So it starts to spell out that this entity, this UPIC, is really an investigative agency for the Medicare contractor versus simply we're auditing and we're trying to recover some overpayment for the program, right? And I think it's somewhat exacerbated by the fact that if anybody's encountered a UPIC investigator, they will come in to your office and they will say, well, we're simply auditing some claims, right? And I've mentioned this before, I think, to our good friend Sean Weiss when we've had discussions. This is what we used to say in law enforcement speak. It's verbal judo, right? It's you're putting somebody at ease using your words in order
you
to
sugarcoat it first.
Exactly, sugarcoat it so that the provider goes, okay, yeah, all right, we're just being audited, they want to get some money back, here's the medical records that you need, when in actuality what the provider needs to be thinking, oh, it's a UPIC, it's, Safeguard or Clarent or Covenant Bridge, right? And they need to step back and go, okay, what's the time frame associated with this request? It's usually 30 days. The provider should never be asked to, immediately provide the documentation, right? And in that time frame, these providers need to be, speaking with somebody, whether it be an educated consultant like yourself, more preferably, an attorney, right, to kind of protect those rights, right, and understand that this UPIC audit can't, or I tripped myself up, right? This UPIC investigation can quickly escalate to a law enforcement referral and a criminal investigation. So the sooner that an attorney gets involved, the sooner, steps could be taken to mitigate any of the negative outcomes.
Absolutely. Thank you. I wanted you to emphasize everything you just said for my audience, right? Because my audience did not all attend your session at NamUs. So I wanted to just emphasize the clarity and the difference on what the UPIC does. So you're absolutely correct. They do go in and they sugarcoat. And I know in the past, I've seen the UPIC letters with my own eyes, and they say something in the beginning. They used to say something in the beginning that they're just auditing for this and that for this particular service. Send your records in.
They're doing a post-payment medical review, right?
Right. But, it's always, I always advise providers, you need to have a reputable healthcare attorney on speed dial for these types of situations, right? They should never just be dumping their records without talking to an attorney, to the UPIC, to the MAC, to whoever. I always think it's best practice for a provider to seek legal counsel, so everything stays privileged. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and absolutely. That's a very important component of it. It's simply that, there's no, professional code or provider, privilege, right? But there is attorney-client privilege.
That's right.
And so the attorneys and providers can talk, can get to the bottom of what the issue may be, and that's still protected. So yeah, great point.
Amazing. Now, you have been speaking quite a bit on data analytics, right? From the UPIC side, from the MAC side. They all are very large and have the capability of data analytics. And, I've been trying to advise providers for quite some time that they need to do a better job of analyzing the data that they create, right? But they have a difficult time in doing that. Do you have any advice for your provider clients on how they can do a better job on self-auditing, internal auditing, all of their services to make sure that they won't be the ones receiving any of these auditing letters, these investigative letters in their future?
Well, the difficult part is I could never say anything that would guarantee that they won't get a letter requesting medical records that will prevent them from being audited or investigated. Well, I'd like to hope that I can take steps to prevent them from being investigated, but never to prevent them from being audited, right? Audits, whether they're from the MAC or the RAC or whoever, are just a function of the system, right? But I think you're right. Providers need to do better about doing self audits. In fact, the OIG has, compliance guidelines, or it has model compliance programs for various providers, including, small practices. And really, it's a matter of 7 elements. And the big one that I harp on that gets left out a lot is just that internal audit. Right. It's looking at your claims to see what's going on. Now, as far as best practices goes, it really kind of depends on what the provider has available to them. A lot of them have these billing software packages that can run reports. And so it's really, what's level of sophistication do they have? I like Excel. All right, so I will often ask clients to just provide me their claims data for a specified time period in Excel, and I can use that data and I can start to manipulate that data. And you can do things like look at your top billed codes. You can look at your top billed modifiers. And much like law enforcement, much like UPIC, that have the ability to do different modes of analysis, right? You can take an individual analysis and then build upon it, which is done often at these regulatory and law enforcement levels. You can do the same. So you can look at, the providers can look at, okay, what are my top codes? All right, if I trend that out over a time frame, have I experienced any kind of noticeable growth within those top codes? And if you start to see spikes in certain services or with certain modifiers, you can use that and go, okay, I need to look at the medical records to determine why is this the case, right? So you can do, procedure code, you could do diagnosis code, you could do, you could do a modifier and see, okay, is there anything that's jumping out at me and that I need to just look at the documentation and say, okay, does the documentation that I have support the medical necessity for the service? And in doing so, you should also be looking at, whatever LCD, NCDs are in existence for that service to go, okay, all right, I can't protect against an audit, but if I am audited, I can explain away what's going on.
Perfect. Great advice for providers. I love it, Matt. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you for
welcome.
sharing all those tips. Amazing. Now, I know our time is short. You are a busy attorney, but I'm glad you got to spend a few moments with me today. But in my last question, what is Matt Lawhon still striving for, right? You've got your own law practice opened up in Texas. What's going to happen to you in the next 5 years?
That's a great question. That's one of those, SAT or not SAT, but that's one of those college entrance, essay questions. And really, I don't necessarily have a good answer other than, I'm a solo practitioner. I enjoy doing what I'm doing, but a lot of times my ability to grow and improve as an attorney is stunted. So, I hope that I can continue down a path of success, but I hope that path of success allows me to have more opportunities to work with other attorneys, with people like you, to, get better at the practice of law, to improve my knowledge base of healthcare so that I can, better serve my clients. So really, that's all I'm looking to do, get better at what I do, be exposed to more relationships like this one, where I get to talk to, knowledgeable people, because great, I'm an attorney, but you have a knowledge base, that your listeners have a knowledge base that could only support and buttress what I do for a living, right? So it makes me a better attorney as a healthcare attorney if I can interact with people in the healthcare space, not necessarily from a legal standpoint, from just a general healthcare knowledge standpoint. Again, so it's finding that those relationships, whether they be legal, whether they be healthcare, that make me better at what I do.
I love it, Matt. I love it. I know you can do anything you want, and absolutely helping in the healthcare space is what it's all about. So I love it. I love those last words from you. Amazing. Now, you know what? Where can my listeners find you? Is there any place I can put in my show notes? Can they find you on LinkedIn, at your law
So they
firm?
can, yeah, absolutely. They can find me at LinkedIn, just Matthew Lawhon. They can find me online. My website is, yeah, it's http://mblawhonlaw.com, or you could just Google me, like Matt Lawhon attorney, and I think my website pops up pretty quick. They can always email me. I'm happy to share my email, matt@mblawhonlaw.com. And yeah, I mean, however they want to get a hold of me, I'm happy to chat if they got questions and need some help. Or if they want to share, the information that they have on stuff, I'm happy to listen. I'm much better at listening than I am at talking, though, this podcast seems to suggest otherwise.
No, you're amazing. Your insights here are huge, and I know my audience is going to eat this up. So thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I'll make sure
Well,
I'll
thanks for
put
having
all
me.
of your details in my show notes. So
Please.
thank you.
Thank you.
And now it's time for my best practice tips in Trusty Tip. So, in today's new Back to Basics compliance tip, I wanted to focus on who are the UPICs. Just like the episode I dedicated to listener questions on who are the RACs just a few weeks ago, I thought this to be a very fitting Back to Basics episode alongside my interview with attorney Matt Lawhon. So, did you know the Medicare Program Integrity Manual, Chapter 4, is literally titled Program Integrity? I wanted to highlight some of the details from it in Section 4.2.2, which is titled Unified Program Integrity Contractors, UPICs. Now it states, quote, the UPIC is responsible for preventing, detecting, and deterring fraud, waste, and abuse in both the Medicare and the Medicaid program. The UPIC prevents fraud by identifying program vulnerabilities. The UPIC proactively identifies incidents of potential fraud, waste, and abuse that exist within its service area and takes appropriate action on each case. The UPIC investigates allegations of fraud made by beneficiaries, providers, or suppliers, CMS, the OIG, and other sources. When appropriate, the UPIC may collaborate with CMS or state Medicaid agencies, SMAs, as well as MFUCU personnel. The UPIC explores all available sources of fraud leads in its jurisdiction, including the SMAs as well as the Medicaid Fraud Control Units, those MFUCUs. The UPICs initiate appropriate administrative actions where there is reliable evidence of fraud, including, but not limited to, payment suspensions and revocations. The UPICs refer cases to the OIG as well as the Office of Investigations, the OI, for consideration of civil and criminal prosecution and or application of administrative sanctions. The UPIC refers any necessary provider or supplier and beneficiary outreach to the provider outreach and education staff at the MAC. The UPIC initiates and maintains networking and outreach activities to ensure effective interaction and exchange of information with internal components as well as outside groups. The UPIC partners with state Medicaid PI units to perform the above activities in suspected Medicaid fraud, waste, and abuse cases. And finally, the UPIC works closely with CMS on joint projects, joint investigations, and other proactive anti-fraud activities. Now moving on, this particular chapter states, the UPIC is required to use a variety of techniques, both proactive and reactive, to address any potentially fraudulent, wasteful, or abusive billing practices based on the various leads they receive. Proactive leads are leads identified or self-initiated by the UPIC. Examples of proactive leads include, but are not limited to, number one, UPIC data analysis that uncovers inexplicable aberrancies that indicate potentially fraudulent, wasteful, or abusive billing for specific providers and suppliers. Number two, the discovery of a new lead by a UPIC during a provider or supplier or beneficiary interview. And finally, third, the combining of information from a variety of sources to create a new lead. Now, moving on, the chapter unfolds and talks about, quote, the UPIC shall pursue leads identified through data analysis, the internet, the unified case management system, news media, industry work groups, conferences, etc. For workload reporting purposes, the UPIC shall only identify as proactive those investigations and cases that the UPIC self-initiated. The UPIC shall take prompt action after scrutinizing billing practices, patterns, or trends that may indicate fraudulent billing. Fraud leads from any external source are considered to be reactive and not proactive. However, taking ideas from external sources, such as fraud alerts, and using them to look for unidentified aberrancies within UPIC data is proactive. End quote. Now, let's move on and talk about the various UPIC jurisdictions, right? Who are they? So first, the Western Jurisdiction UPIC contractor is known as Clarent. Now, those Western states include Alaska, Arizona, California, Hawaii, Idaho, Montana, Nevada, North Dakota, Oregon, South Dakota, Utah, Washington, and Wyoming. Second, the next is the Southwestern Jurisdiction UPIC contractor, who's also known as Clarent. Now, those Southwestern states include Colorado, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. Third, the Midwestern Jurisdiction UPIC contractor is known as Covenant Bridge Group, and those Midwestern states include Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Kansas, Kentucky, Michigan, Minnesota, Missouri, Nebraska, Ohio, and Wisconsin. Fourth, the Northeastern Jurisdiction UPIC contractor is Safeguard Services, LLC. Now, those northeastern states include Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and the District of Columbia. And finally, fifth, the Southeastern Jurisdiction UPIC contractor is also with Safeguard Services, LLC. Now, these southeastern states include West Virginia, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, and Florida. So that's huge, right? That's a huge back to basics on who are the UPICs. And I wanted to make sure I included this back to basics alongside with that absolutely fascinating conversation I had with attorney Matt Lawhon on UPICs. So I just wanted to emphasize again the facts here that UPICs really do have real teeth. It's important for my providers to stay involved in their coding and billing practices. It's fundamental if you have Medicare as a payer to keep your eyes on correct and compliant coding and billing practices and make sure that you are adhering to them to ensure you are meeting the medical necessity from the very start. Because when the documentation paints the medical picture with clarity and vibrancy from the onset of care, a certified medical coder can then abstract codes with accuracy. And finally, I focus Season 5 Spark on clarity and focus. I want this 5th season Spark to be filled with the world's thought leaders, writers, artists, philosophers, everyone who inspires the need for clarity and focus in all that we do. So, in this week's inspiring quote in Spark is from Gautama Buddha. Dwell not on the faults and shortcomings of others. Instead, seek clarity about your own. Absolutely true, right? I think this new year allows us to turn the pages in our own lives, to seek clarity and focus from within. I am happy Gautama Buddha's spark still burns brightly in all of us today. So that wraps up today's episode, and as always, I appreciate you diving into today with me. If you want more information from me, please go ahead and follow me on LinkedIn. I'll leave links to everything in the show notes below. Please have an amazing week ahead, and please continue staying safe and healthy in the meantime. Thank you so much for listening in on today's very special episode, and I hope every week with me brings you closer to helping your providers paint a masterpiece. See you next Wednesday.